Dear Len, I'm very glad, but we are very glad you took the time for this interview. And thanks to you and your team, we are able to bring Safewards to Germany a few years ago to improve the situations for patients in acute psychiatry. And we could like to ask you a few questions in this interview to give colleagues in Germany the opportunity to benefit from your knowledge. I'm very happy to find the time today.
No problem. Please go ahead.
Okay. Michael, please start with the first question.
Yeah, we thought of asking you what brought you into the field of violence in acute psychiatry, and yeah, how did you find this field of research, and how did you then come to Safewards?
There's probably lots of different answers to this question, but the one that I have been thinking about a lot recently was way before I ever started work as a psychiatric nurse or even thought of becoming a mental health nurse. I worked as a volunteer for a homeless charity in a night shelter. So I was 18 years old and in charge of a night shelter for street homeless people in my hometown who were all exceedingly difficult, often exceedingly intoxicated on different substances, rejected by all other sources of help, and on occasion extremely violent. So I had to learn to cope with that very, very quickly from a matter of self-preservation by being able to talk to people, mainly people who turned up to the hostel in the middle of the night wanting to be admitted after we closed our doors. And so I suppose I was in that tense crisis situation right at that age of 18, and that probably sowed the seed of me wanting to learn about how better to deal with difficult behavior. There's no bigger ocean of difficult behaviors, I think, than amongst the street homeless in any country.
So there was a starting point. When we look back to the research, when I look at the research on violence in acute psychiatry, from my point of view, it started around maybe the 80s in the last century, and it started with to look what patients become violent and so on, and we made the first interventions, and from my point of view, it's like a growing knowledge which brought us from this point where we started to Safewards as a complex intervention. Would you agree with that?
Certainly there has been an increasing amount of research done on the management of difficult behaviors, yes. But the primary purpose of an acute psychiatric ward is to promote safety of patients. Many patients are admitted primarily on grounds of safety. So it's inevitably our big topic. It's the one thing we want to succeed at, keeping people safe. And so it's a natural thing to act as a first topic for research.
Yeah. Okay. But today we think it's important to see it as a complex intervention, and maybe something like human rights have changed a little bit, so that the focus changed on that thing, and maybe in the best case these interventions can help to reduce a kind of violence which would not be reduced if we won't work with that things. And sometimes we see that a lot of hospitals are not very interested in using the knowledge we could have. or what is your experience?
It's very hard to generalize about all hospitals or about why hospitals might be resistant to taking on research-based interventions, or which research-based interventions they're prepared to take up and which they're not. Too big a subject, I think, to generalize to say there's a single reason for that. Every hospital is in its own position, with its own preoccupations, with its management team that is responding to national and local circumstances. So I don't think it's easy to come up with an answer to say hospital A is not doing something because of X or because of Y.
So Safewards was a big project from the NHS, and today it has a lot of impact in Germany, but also in Australia. So did you expect that, or at what point had you maybe the feeling that it would be such a big bullet you made?
I never expected it to be this popular. And I continue to be astonished by how big it's becoming. It's like a monster. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So when I was first preparing for the results of the randomized controlled trial and was thinking about if these results are positive, how are we going to help people to implement it? Then certainly I was thinking about making things accessible to people. And I was thinking about how to promote it internationally. But I always imagined that what would happen would be there would be a few wards, perhaps 10 wards or so with bright and engaging and committed ward managers who would go forward with the intervention for a period of time, and that it would kind of simmer rather than it achieve the popularity that it has achieved. So we prepared as best we could, but we never expected it to do this well. And one of the things that I never actually anticipated, which has been true now in lots of different countries, is that there are people like you two who step forward and promote it within your own countries and make it available and support people who want to implement it. That was something I never anticipated at all.
But I think it's very interesting that Safewards continues to spread across the globe, if you said, and it seemed that despite different cultures and psychiatric orientations, there are universal factors of effectiveness. What factors might these be from your perspective?
I'll just go back to the underlying model and ask yourself what could be different in another culture. I mean, you can see some nuances, perhaps around beliefs about mental disorder and its causes, or some nuances around exactly what the regulatory framework is in different countries. But by and large, all of those factors are near human universals of giving care to people who are mentally disordered. So the applicability everywhere doesn't surprise me. The actual implementation and popularity of it everywhere does. But then I suppose this is happening at the same time as the internet is expanding and global communication is expanding. So it kind of arrived at a right moment historically for this degree of impact.
Yeah, I think one success is that it is in the end simple to understand what it is. I think that's important for interventions. But as you developed it, it started as a nursing intervention, and then we and today we think it has to be work with all professional groups on the ward. So what do you think about that question, that theme?
I'm trying to remember, did we actually sell it or market it as a nursing specific intervention? Did we actually put that? We might have put that in our grant application because we thought it would facilitate our funding and it would focus the description of the intervention. But when it came down to running the trial, we invited whoever was willing to engage to participate. And that meant that primarily in the UK, a lot of occupational therapists joined in, a slightly smaller number of relatively junior doctors. I don't know if we had any consultant psychiatrists that made a material contribution, but certainly they were all aware of the trial. So no, I'm not surprised at all, really. We kind of built it as an open source package for everybody who wanted to, or who would, to engage with it.
So we are strongly, when we make our workshops here, then it's a lot of about the 10 interventions, and we know there are some more, but we have sometimes the question, when is Safewards implemented and when it is not implemented? And it's also the question with, you have to work with the characters on the ward, with the specialities, and you have to shape it a little bit. But what is your answer to when is it still Safewards and when it is maybe something else?
All right, so one part of that question was about when is it implemented, when is it actually finished? And my experience in the UK is that whenever you implement something on psychiatric wards, it always falls apart. It's kind of inevitable on acute psychiatric wards that staff will move on. Extremely challenging patients will be admitted. Staff will be moved between wards. So one Safewards implementation is not enough. You're going to have to keep on relaunching and redoing it and reviving each of the interventions. So I cannot really imagine that that process will ever completely come to a conclusion. The second part of this was something that I was going to speak about later, but I'll speak about it now. I would be much more pleased if people gave deeper thought to the content of the interventions and what was being required of them. Because there's actually a lot packed into those interventions and a lot of being demanded in terms of people changing their thinking, changing their evaluations of patient behaviors, changing their interpretations of patient behaviors, changing their self-management as to how they present to patients, consciously or unconsciously, looking for different things in patient behaviors, managing their own emotional responses to patients in a better way. That's not something that you learn in 5 minutes or after somebody's told you with an intervention. That's a lifetime thing. So is becoming more technically and interpersonally skilled. I'm still working on that, and I'm retired and I'm 66. So these are continuous processes. So that was about when is Safewards finished. Safewards is never finished. You can always go further. But there was another part to your question, Michael. Can you remind me what it was?
Yeah. It was the question about how many interventions should be implemented that you can talk Safewards is implemented, because some wards say, well, we made 3 interventions of Safewards and so we do Safewards, and we would say, well, that's something else but not Safewards. But
well, 3 is better than none. And, you know, none of us actually often really know the situation on those psychiatric wards that we go to visit. We don't know the managerial setup. We have no idea of the history between people. We don't really know what else is going on in that psychiatric hospital. And I think there comes a point when we have to trust the people who are in charge of the ward to make their own decisions about what it is that they do in their wards and support them in doing so. Certainly we can offer to them and say, and certainly it would be right to say to them that you're only doing 3 interventions and there are 7 more absolutely helpful interventions that you might want to choose from and implement. And you really can't say that you're doing the whole of Safewards or go and say Safewards without giving any further explanation. You could say you're doing a third of Safewards. That would be more speaking the truth. So if people are deliberately exaggerating or wanting other people to go away and stop making demands of them and want to say we're doing Safewards on the basis of 3 interventions, then that's well worth challenging. If they're saying we're doing 3 interventions and that's all we can do at the moment in these circumstances, then that is also fine.
So going back to something you said before, that's keeping Safewards alive after implementation. Do you have thoughts on how you could support that process to keep that form of self-reflection going?
Well, a number of different ways have been used so far, hasn't there? There's been International Safewards Day is one. Relaunching individual interventions is another. Changing around your intervention champions would be potentially another. Having a month in which you focus on one of the interventions specifically would be another. Holding a local Safewards celebration with your patients would be another. You know, our nurses have proved all the way over in all of our different countries that they're incredibly creative about these things. So you just have to encourage people to be confident about their own answers to these questions.
Len, the networking idea you have created via the Facebook group, for example, is great from my perspective. And how many people are part of the group now, and how many countries do they come from?
It's about 8,500.
Okay.
I can't say how many countries because I don't think Facebook gives me a breakdown. And I don't particularly want to go clicking through 8,500 people to try and guess where they come from.
But how many languages?
Worldwide,
yeah, but maybe how many languages has the intervention and the model been translated into?
I'm not sure where we're up to at the moment. Let me just have a look. I think the Czech version is just starting to go up. And there is a Swedish version in production at the moment. So we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 languages so far. I'm very keen to get French because French is an important language worldwide.
For African countries, yeah.
So if anybody listens to this and has French-speaking capability and is willing to translate the website, we will pay for it to be put up if you can find a French translation. I'm also very keen to get Chinese and Russian. When we get those 3, and Arabic, actually, when we get those 4, we'll be well ahead in making it more accessible to more of the world's population.
When I first heard about Safewards, I think it was in 2012 in Istanbul. during the Horatio Congress, I was inspired by the pragmatism of the model and the intervention. And when people ask me how I would summarize Safewards, I like to say that for me, I define Safewards as an operationalized attitudes. How would you summarize Safewards for yourself in one sentence?
Yeah. Oh, the first thing I'd say, Michael, is while you were enjoying the conference and partying and spending all of your time at various bars or whatever, I was going back to my hotel room and I was writing the Safewards website.
Yes, you spoke about it. We have launched it in the next few days. Yes, yes.
So there was that. And can I summarize it in one sentence? No, I think it's too complicated to summarize completely in one sentence. What would be the central idea?
Okay, I give you three sentences.
The central ideas, aren't they, is that there are flashpoints and that there are staff and patient modifiers of what happens during and after those flashpoints. So that was about as close as I can get to a one-sentence explanation.
Len, we will come to the end, I think, and the last question is, what question would you have asked yourself?
I would have been much harder on me. Okay. So the first thing I would have asked me would be, okay, that's fine, Professor Bowers. We know that Safewards can help us reduce conflict and containment by 25%. What about the other 75%?
A good question, yes.
Yes, so I would say, well, I'm retired now. This is up to people who are still living and working and researching in academia. And I would like to see them concentrate a little bit more on that 75%, because at the moment we can't even describe where it might lie, where the causes are in that in the Safewards model. We're always very quick to say, well, it's the illness, so it would go under patient characteristics. But really, is all of that 75% in there? The other thing which is difficult to change is the physical environment, because that's costly and involves staff interactions with the environment and involves, in fact, staff numbers, generally speaking, because it's how the staffing numbers fit into the physical environment together with the patients. Is some of that 75% there? Or is there a domain? Is there a seventh domain?
Okay.
So I don't know. I have more. I would have asked myself.
Wonderful.
I would have asked myself, why don't you do more high quality, significantly sized outcome research that confirms that Safewards works? Because as we have seen with vaccines for coronavirus, one trial is seldom enough. And then what happens when you implement your vaccines in real life is not necessarily exactly the same as what happens during the trial. So I think there is still a need for further outcome research in relation to Safewards to secure our findings or to understand better how it's being implemented in real life and what the critical parts of the overall model are. At the other end of the scale, I would have asked myself, why aren't you doing any phenomenological studies about critical incidents, about evaluating Safewards by asking the staff after they've implemented it to give descriptions of when they have tried to use the methods in the 10 interventions and give us examples of when they have and haven't worked and your thoughts on why they did or didn't work under those circumstances. So that might get us a little bit further. And lastly, I think, Professor Bowers, if I'm speaking to myself, the regulatory framework needs much more thinking about in the model. And it is no surprise that those service user organisations that have responded about Safewards have focused on that part of the model and said that we need to pay greater attention to the way in which we are restricting people's liberties, or to the kind of contract or bargain we have with patients when we formally detain them under mental health legislation. What are the promises that we're making to them? I suppose that's more of a mutual expectation, a big size mutual expectations question. Detaining somebody in hospital is not a one-sided thing in which we make somebody do something. It's a contract that if we take away your liberty, we will do X. And what's in that X?
I see.
And
You
are
have
we
the
delivering
better
on it?
questions, yeah.
Yeah, are we delivering on that? And the last thing, seeing as you've given me a podium to start lecturing here, the last thing I would say is that we need far, far more research on how nurses' behaviours and interactions actually do or do not make changes to patients' psychotic behaviours or level of psychosis. We have literally very little idea about how what we do on wards with patients influences the progress of somebody's psychotic disorder. And seeing as so many of our patients are admitted during a relapse of a psychotic disorder, that is a terrible big gaping hole and needs much more research. And indeed, this was the area before I decided to retire. This was the area that I was looking at researching. Unfortunately, what I found was that even the definition of a relapse of there is no definition of a relapse of psychosis. There are very few ways of measuring day-to-day fluctuation in somebody's level of psychosis. So it's a very difficult area to try and connect what nurses do with any kind of outcome. And I realized it would take me another lifetime to put the groundwork in to produce those measures, those reliable measures, and work out what we were actually dealing with in order to even make any progress towards thinking about how nurses should intervene with people with psychosis or not intervene. It might be, in fact, it might be better for patients for us to leave them alone. I can think of a number of patients who might agree with that statement, actually. So lots of big questions there. Loads of research to do. You guys who are still researching in mental health nursing now, you've still got a rich field of things to investigate and look at. Everything about what psychiatric nurses do on wards needs further investigation and research, so that you can have, another 10 different safe wards for different aspects of what we're doing. Because patient safety is only one part of what wards do. There's a whole host of other stuff too.
Yeah, and we come a lot now with safe wards. We come through a lot of hospitals, and then we sometimes find that the safe wards ward is left alone in the hospital from the other wards. So there is a relationship how wards could help each other, and sometimes they do not help very good now. But I thank you for all these research questions. We have students tomorrow. We will tell them what their master thesis is about. And yeah, we see we have a lot to do, a lot of work, but at the moment we are just have work to spread the Safewards idea over Germany. And then we try to research it, but in fact there are people who want to make research work on Safewards. And so we will go on further on this. And yeah, at this point, we thank you very much for the interview.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. Glad to be of a little bit of help and support to you.
Thank you very much, Len. Bye.
Bye.
See you.